It is time for our weekly segment with Mr. Bob Pollock from the Extension. You can call. I'll tell you what, though, we're having trouble with that line. So I'm afraid we're not going to be able to take calls this morning. It's only ringing busy today. And phone company says they're working on it, but they don't have it fixed yet, Bob. So it's just you and me, baby.
Okay. Maybe we're clogging up the line.
Our conversation brought to you by Marcus of Mack, a law firm representing injured people. What I should have done was I should have called you on the bad line because I can get out on that line and give you this line. But it's too late for that. Let's just spend some time talking here, shall we?
Will do. Let's do it.
All right. So we take a look around at things as we get toward the middle part of February now. And we start to think more and more about the beginning of the growing season, but we're still under some snow right now. So let's think about things that we should be thinking about for gardens or lawns or trees at this point of the year. We've been planning and we've been looking in the seed catalogs and considering what we might plant. Are there other things that we should be doing in preparation for the season?
Well, making the plan, looking at the plan, revising the plan, maybe even second guessing yourself sometimes is okay to do. And especially if you're trying to do something different, or if you're trying to maybe start the season sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Or that can go both ways, though. Maybe you've had some bad experiences by trying to start plants early, and that can often happen because we're going through winter, we're ready to jump into spring and get things planted and get outdoors, and sometimes we can jump the gun and try to force things. Mm-hmm. So either the conditions outside, the ground is too wet, maybe you didn't get it worked up enough, or maybe you have a cover crop that you planted this past fall, and you want to get in there and get that worked up, and then you start to push things along too quickly. That can cause us more trouble than if we would just sit back, maybe read an extra book, and then go at it when the time is right. Because if the soil is too cold, and there's a lot of plants that are sensitive to that, every plant has a range, temperature range, and conditions that it needs to, if we're starting from seed, to germinate that seed. And so we need to pay attention to that and not assume that, it's a seed. So if we plant it, it's going to grow if there's enough moisture. Mm-hmm. Well, some seeds are less sensitive to temperature and others are more sensitive. So just knowing what you're planting, what the conditions are necessary to get that seed to germinate, and then trying to do that. That's why we mentioned last week about putting a little bottom heat. You can start seeds indoors, but maybe even your air temperature in your basement, for example, is in the low 60s or something, or maybe even the 50s, because it might be partially unheated. Well, that can be too cool for a lot of seeds to germinate. So just having a heat mat underneath there. Don't try to heat the whole space. Just try to put some bottom heat on, and that's all it takes to warm that soil up enough that those seeds can germinate. Now you might have a problem once they come up if the temperature is too cool, but getting the process started, that might be all it takes to do that.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was for those who have compost piles that maybe they haven't been out to for a while, they probably do need at this time to get out and turn those things over a little bit, right? Because if they're planning on using it in the spring, they'll want to have good usable stuff that's been turned over a few times.
And that could be a good way to try and get some exercise at this point in the winter. Some of those piles might be a little frozen, a little hard to deal with, but there's probably still some heat in there. It depends on, you might be able to look at it, and if it's completely snow-covered and in the mounds there, you might not be able to do anything yet. But you're right, that if it hasn't been turned, the more we turn it, the faster it becomes broken down and becomes that compost that we can use. Mm-hmm. And we can do it just in a static pile. it just takes longer. It might take a year or 2 years, depending on the size of the material and the materials you put in there as to how quickly they break down. If it's a big pile of oak leaves, it'll take a lot longer to break down into leaf mold and then into compost than if it's maple leaves or poplar leaves.
This is completely off the subject, but I note that Penn State Extension and the State Public Utility Commission have formed a partnership about expanding broadband access across Pennsylvania, which looks like a pretty promising thing. And I'm looking at the map that they have of underserved or unserved areas. Indiana County is pretty prominent in that. And so as you look at those things, and like I said, it might not even be a fair question to ask you, but have you had any communication from Extension about what this is going to mean?
Well, and that might be a topic that you want to have Tom Brezhnok. We get him on the air, and he can talk about that because he works out of our office.
Uh-huh.
And he actually has had an interest in this from the beginning and has been part of trying to make connections for all this to happen. So he would be a great person to chat with about that some morning in a segment, and I think he could fill you in, and then he can also speak to the rural electric side of this too, because that along the way has been an important piece, or maybe a method, a way that this can happen, especially in our rural areas where we have the rural electric cooperatives, like REA in our area.
Well, great. Let's get Tom on next week. I'll give you some possible dates. I'll send them to you, and we can narrow it down and see if we can get him on to talk about that, because that's pretty exciting news, actually.
It is. Yeah, and I'm not sure how quickly all of this can happen, but it's taken a lot of work behind the scenes, just try to get the pieces together, and I think a lot of people, from here to Washington, D.C. know that it's an issue, it's a problem, and if we're going to have rural communities continue to be able to compete, we need to have that connectivity so that our local businesses can compete and play on the same field with other businesses that might be in a more urban area where that infrastructure has already been built out.
Yeah, we think about all the different ramifications, and certainly the schools have become a big part of this conversation, and remote distance learning and farm business applications. We've talked before with others, including County Commissioner Shireen Hess, about how farmers can certainly be benefiting from improved access to the internet, and how it will help their business and help them to stay in business. But even from the small home use type folks who want to look up different applications, different say products that they want to try planting in their area, having that access and not having it, there's such a benefit to them, and it's a quality of life issue, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah, we don't. 30 years ago, who'd have thought? But today, if you don't have it, you know it, you feel it. It limits what some of the things you can do or would like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always economies of scale, and we're not always going to, because of our population size and demographics of our population here, we're not always going to be able to have that storefront that's right there where we can go and purchase things when we need them.
Oh.
So having that ability to reach out and order and have things shipped is pretty important.
Also need to note that parsley has been named the herb of the year. I thought you...
Yes, and we talked about that a couple of weeks ago a little bit, but that's right. So you have different organizations out there like the Perennial Plant Association. You can Google that, Perennial Plant, and so each year they have the Perennial Plant of the Year that they select. And then the Garden Writers of America, National Garden Association, you can look up on their webpage, and they've got 6 or 8 or 10 plants that are kind of plants of the of the year. And then the All-America Selections, AAS, that they trial both vegetables as well as especially annuals that they trial each year at different locations across the country, and then the best of the best. And then they don't just, and it's not necessarily something that just came out that a breeder developed yesterday. For these to become that All-America Selection, they have to have enough seed or plant accessibility built up in the system for that to go live. Otherwise, this is a great plant. Well, if you can only get it from one place and there's only 1,000 of them available for the whole country, that's a problem. So there's a lot of, they have to build that up before they can get that to a national level.
Wanted to note something else that we find on the Extension website today, and it highlights what we were just talking about in terms of broadband, was the virtual meeting for the small fruit program, that the Mid-Atlantic Fruit and Vegetable Convention program, talking about, in this case, strawberries. And when you have internet access and you can follow along for some of these things, then you find out about what they were discussing. And you might say, well, how exciting can that be? But in this case, we talk all the time about this disease attacking this breed of plant or something like that. They were talking about strawberry diseases that are happening in our region. Folks want to know that information, and there it is. And when you have that broadband access, then you have the opportunity then to say, okay, this is the problem that I'm experiencing. It's been addressed here, and now what's the solution? Because not everybody can listen to you on Friday mornings at 7:45.
That's true. We do have some limited accessibility, don't we? Those airwaves.
Yeah. So
that's right. Yeah, we just came off 4 full days of a virtual conference, and it wears you down. You'd think, oh yeah, no big deal. Sit at the computer and go through all this, but I think it wears you out more than it does in being there in person.
Because you're not eating fresh strawberries, that's why.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, that was interesting because we had, just in some of our sessions yesterday, you had a grower from Erie and a grower from Pittsburgh and a grower from New Jersey, and you might have had someone on there from outside of the country as well. Yeah. So there's, with it in person even, there's limitations for people to get there. So this does open up. It can be a limit for somebody that doesn't have internet access for this method, but for someone that does but can't travel from California to Pennsylvania, they can get on and participate. And it also opened up the opportunity to have some speakers address various topics that may not normally be able to, even as a speaker, come to the event and speak in person.
Yeah, all of that is really important stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how quickly and how efficiently we can get broadband into all of these homes that are really, really struggling without it. All right, Mr. Pollock, we're going to set it up with Tom Bresnock then, right?
Yes.
All right, beautiful.
Let's get it done.
Beautiful.
All right.
We'll look forward to that. Hey, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great weekend.
You too. And it is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, 101.1 FM and AM 11, FM and AM 11, FM and